que hemos denominado la enseñanza de lenguas extranjeras e interculturalidad, un tema que hoy queremos empezar a ahondar debido a su, en cierta forma, importancia que está adquiriendo y su relevancia y pertinencia todo lo que sea en el ámbito escolar, tanto en el escolar primario y secundario como en el ámbito académico. Así que invitamos hoy a la doctora Viviana Cortés, que ella trabaja en la Universidad de Georgia, Georgia State University, así se llama, Georgia State University, y ella nos va hoy a, en cierta forma, a ayudar a empezar a entender lo que es el análisis de corpus a través de esto que nos pareció muy importante, la propuesta que ella hace, en darle la voz, en ponderar al estudiante o a la persona que no está dentro de la cultura nativa de la lengua inglesa. Este análisis que ella va a presentar de corpus y de género nos va a servir muchísimo para poder empezar a usar los lazos entre lo que es una cultura y la otra. Será nosotros después empezar a hacer ese contraste entre lo retórico inglés y lo retórico del español. Esa será nuestra tarea posterior. Ella lo que nos va a mostrar es cómo desde su perspectiva, desde no hablante nativa de la lengua inglesa, porque ella es argentina, profesora de la Universidad Tecnológica Argentina, de la UTN, y a partir de allí ella hizo su carrera en Estados Unidos, como no nativa pudo llegar a escribir para nativos como si fuera nativa. Y eso es muy importante porque la experiencia de ella es mucho más importante y es fundamental en esta cuestión ideográfica de la ciencia, de ver cómo en un caso podemos en cierta forma empezar a nosotros a analizar nuestros propios casos. A modo de cosa muy sencilla, queremos otro regalito por haber venido, porque aparte cumplió años ya, aunque no nos va a decir nada, cosa que es correcta. Entonces, un pequeño
muchos.
Así que, no sé si ellos son menos que yo, así que
bueno,
así que bueno, en cierta forma, la idea es para que se lleve algo de nosotros y de Argentina. Lo dejo con ellos y comenzamos a trabajar.
Lo primero que voy a decir, bueno, primero Gabriela, muchísimas gracias por haberme invitado y quiero, a modo de explicación, por qué mi presentación es en inglés. No es una excusa. Y creo que viene muy bien para el tipo de presentación que Gabriela me pidió que hiciera. Yo hice mi escuela primaria, mi escuela secundaria aquí, pero mi terciario fue en el profesorado técnico en la Universidad Tecnológica. O sea que toda mi alfabetización académica fue en inglés. Para mí es muy difícil hacer cualquier tipo de tarea académica en español. Esto es en realidad es un nuevo fenómeno que se da en muchos lugares en donde el inglés es el medio para la enseñanza. Lourdes Ortega, que es una profesora española que trabaja en la Universidad de Georgetown en Washington, D.C., ella explica que cuando uno es bilingüe, yo no me considero bilingüe, pero ella dice que la mayoría de la gente que es bilingüe no se considera bilingüe y que cuando uno es bilingüe, las lenguas primera y segunda o tercera, para algunas personas que tienen otras lenguas, uno tiene distintas habilidades en distintas lenguas y eso es exactamente lo que me pasa a mí. Yo mi Basic Interpersonal Skill, lo que se llama BICS, lo tengo en español sin ningún problema. Hablo con mi familia y mis amigos en español, pero no tengo CALP. No tengo Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. Entonces, eso necesito realizarlo en español, en inglés. Cuando alguien me pide que tengo que hacer una presentación en español, transpiro en frío, me siento muy mal y pido 6 meses por lo menos para poder pedir ayuda a alguien que me revise las presentaciones, porque realmente no me siento cómoda. That was my explanation, and that's why this presentation is going to be in English, which is my academic language, in fact. And I thought of this presentation after many conversations that I had with Gabriela, and I want to start speaking a bit about how we, peripheral writers, that is non-native speakers of English, who have to write in English for particular reasons, how we can take advantage of genre and corpora, and not only myself as a peripheral writer, but also as a teacher of English for academic purposes, particularly for academic writing to non-native speakers of English in the United States. So this is more or less the outline of today's presentation. I'm going to start explaining what English for academic writing, the whole scenario of English for academic writing is in the United States. Then I want to speak about myself as a peripheral writer, and then teaching English for academic purposes. So being a peripheral writer who has been selected by the university to teach English for academic purposes to other peripheral writers. How the idea of using genre and corpora in the English for academic purposes class, particularly the English for academic writing class, came to happen based on data-driven learning and also empowerment of the peripheral writer through autonomy and authenticity. And finally, I want to share with you how this genre-based, corpus-based course was designed with some ideas on curriculum design and how the materials were collected and selected, the corpus and software. And then a brief research study that I did that shows differences, advantages and disadvantages of using corpora in a genre-based class against a genre-based class without corpora. I am a writing instructor for native and non-native speakers of English. I don't know if you are familiar with the system in the United States. Everybody that comes to the university has issues with writing. So you may be a native speaker of English that comes from a high school in the Atlanta area, and you come to Georgia State, that's the university where I work, and there are very few cases in which people don't have problems with writing. I can tell you that there might be exceptions that confirm the rule, particularly when students come from private high schools that have what are called AP, academic proficiency or academic programs. So students in high school are already taking classes that are like university level classes in writing or other areas. At Georgia State is a state school. It's a large school that has a lot of commuter students and returning students. We don't have too many of those. And in fact, throughout the United States, there are not too many students who have absolutely no problems with writing. Now, everything that I'm going to say about a student's writing, students' problems with writing, comes from research that I have read or conducted at the university level. There's very little empirical quantitative analysis of high school writing for one very particular reason. It's almost impossible to get consent to make studies at the high school level. So the Institutional Review Board at Georgia State University, for example, if I wanted to make a corpus-based study of high school writing in which all I want is some samples of writing produced by high school students, they would demand a consent form signed by each student and each one of the students' parents before I could collect any writing. So even if I never have any contact with the student and I am really not interested in knowing anything about the student, maybe the course, the level, maybe if it is a junior or a senior high school student, that would be everything I need. Anyway, in order to get each of those sample papers, I would need at least 3 consent forms, which is it's more troublesome than any other thing. So that's why researchers really don't want to get into high school, and there's very little empirical research that you can do. Particularly for the type of research that I do that calls for a lot of data, okay, so that I can do a statistical analysis of the language. So maybe you can get like a dozen consent forms signed from people, but if you need 1 million papers, it's not going to happen so easily. It's going to take several years to get all those. things. So, so as I said, both native and non-native speakers have issues when they come to university. The issues that they have are usually of different nature. Okay, so high school writers, I have a theory that is that during high school they have been writing about their last vacation over and over again. So like narration, and so when they come to university and we want them to write some argumentative writing, they have absolutely no idea what they are doing, and they go back to what they did in their last vacation or something of the sort. Okay, now non-native speakers have different issues because also, I don't know if you are familiar, but there are different types of non-native speaker students at the university in the United States. For example, at Georgia State, the majority of the students that we have are what we call international students, which are what I was when I went to the States to study. I had done all my English education, like English language education, in Argentina, so I had a level of proficiency in English, and I went to the States to study. That is the international student. It's a person born and raised somewhere else who had English education in their country of origin. Now there's also what we, I think it's a horrible name, but what everybody calls Generation 1.5 students, who are students who were born in the States to non-native speaker parents, or students who were born in another country or in other countries, and they came to the United States when they were young, usually younger than 10 years old. So they did most of their schooling in the United States, but they may be still speaking another language at home, or they may have learned English as their second language, even though they went to school in the States. Those are the two major populations we have, and these two non-native speakers have different needs, because the international students are what we call I learners, because they learn the language usually reading. Okay, particularly, for example, if you come from countries in Asia, the education is usually reading-based and grammar-based, so there's very little oral communication for them. So they may have more advantages in reading comprehension, but they have problems in listening comprehension and many times in speaking. While the Generation 1.5 that we call early arriving students, they are what we call ER learners, because they learned the language at school orally, and so they are very fluent. It's very difficult sometimes to identify them as non-native speakers in class until they write. Okay, so when they write, you can see that they make the same type of mistakes and they have the same weaknesses and strengths as international students when they write. And then, of course, there are a lot of shades in their development, because for international students, it will their level and their proficiency will depend on how old they were and what stage of education they are at. So if you have an international student that comes as a PhD student to the United States, you will have that student has a certain level of proficiency, and the problems that the student may have are of a certain kind. Okay. In the case of the Generation 1.5 or early arriving student, it will depend on how old the student was when he or she arrived in the States, and also how many years of schooling, and also some acculturation, how much language, how much native language he speaks at home. Okay, so I am a peripheral writer and I work in the United States. I went to the States first to do a master's program, but the master's program was in fact delivered in Argentina, and we went to the States for only 1 quarter. And then I went to live there for my PhD. I did my PhD at Northern Arizona University. And to be honest with you, at Northern Arizona, there was absolutely no class or workshop or any help for non-native speaker writers. So I did my academic literacy training on my own. Trial and error, and very painfully. So I think that my interest in academic writing for non-native speakers comes from that frustration. I really don't want my students to have to go through what I had to go through. So I wrote my first I wrote some research papers in my master's program, but they were usually group work, so I really didn't know what I was doing. And when I was doing my doctoral studies, I could write. I had a very good writing, a very high writing proficiency, but my academic writing was really not where it should have been. As I said, I even wrote a doctoral dissertation without knowing very much what I was doing. I graduated and I got a job in the States. I started teaching, and the first classes that I taught were graduate level grammar class. English grammar is my area of specialization. The second class that I was asked to teach my first semester at Iowa State, which was the university where I first worked, was called Advanced Academic Writing for International Graduate Students. Okay, so I said, oh, how appropriate, I'm so interested. However, I didn't know what I was doing with my writing. What could I know about telling my students what to do with their writing? Of course, there's a tradition in the United States when you are asked to write a class, someone will give you his or her syllabus. And that's the way that you start. Okay, so someone had been teaching that class for a while and gave me her syllabus, and the textbook that they were using, the textbook was called Writing Up Research. I read the syllabus, I thought it made sense, and so I decided that I was going to use the syllabus and the textbook and see how I was doing with that. So that was how I started teaching English for academic purposes in the United States. Now, at the end of my first semester teaching that class, I had a Turkish student. Oh, the class was very nice. It was delivered in a lab, in a computer lab. I had 20 students, all of them, not all of them, usually 80-20 PhDs, MA students, master students, and my students were from all over the world, and they were from all over the disciplinary spectrum of the university. That means if I had 20 students, I had a person from computer science sitting next to a mathematician, sitting next to a plant physiologist. I was at Iowa State. It's a land-grant university. It's very much interested in agronomy, and I had someone from applied linguistics sitting next to someone from rhetoric and composition. So 20 students coming from 20 different disciplines. It could happen. I was lucky, and in some cases I may have had 2 or 3 disciplines that repeated, but that didn't happen very often. So at the end of my first semester, I had a student that on the student evaluation wrote this. He said, "The contents of this course are very interesting, but unfortunately, in my discipline, we don't write like this." Okay? And so I was very frustrated because I had 20 students. And I had the feeling that even though they all thought the class was interesting and their writing was improving, okay, but I think that out of so much writing, okay, so you write, you do less mistakes, you write better, more feedback, you write better. But I had the feeling that many of my students had the same shared frustration, that in their disciplines, they didn't write like that. Now, how could I solve that? Because I had 20 students from 20 different disciplines, and I had not too many chances that next semester I would have the same disciplines. And so I had to make a very difficult decision. How could I teach my students how to write in their disciplines if I didn't know how they wrote in their disciplines? And what was more important, even more important, was I interested in knowing how all of those disciplines wrote? Was it feasible for me to learn how the 400 different disciplines in my university in those days wrote. It was like very, very big interrogation mark. I said, there has to be a solution to this puzzle, okay? And so that's how this genre and corpora classroom came to happen, and that was the idea that I had. Being a trained corpus-based researcher and using corpora for my classes, I thought, oh wow, I could try to design a class in which students could become their own analysts, their own language analysts. Okay, the language that they are interested in writing would be the target for their analysis, and then with that analysis they could transfer that into their own writing. That was in fact the premise that I had from the very beginning when I came with the idea. I said, okay, and it came from that little sentence in the evaluation form. So the idea behind the corpus-based, genre-based class, it comes from two different areas. One is the computers and corpora in the classroom, and the other one from authenticity and autonomy in the classroom. So the idea is, I am very familiar with computers. I work with computers all the time. I'm very familiar with corpora, and I know how corpora can be exploited to find tendencies in a particular genre. So I said, okay, if I could train my students in analyzing language, and they can see the trends, the tendencies that those authors, the writers of those texts that they are analyzing, if they can identify those tendencies, maybe they can use those tendencies as a model for them to use when they write. So I thought that computers could promote a learner-centered approach, because I mean the computers could give them the tools that they needed to do that type of analysis, and then they could have they could decide on their own pace. Okay, so it's like, okay, I need this, I'm going to do this now, and then motivation is something that we can talk about later on. And when you see the research study that I did, you will see how motivation can, corpora and computers can also be a source of motivation. Okay, then this idea of data-driven learning comes from the exploration of corpora. Okay, so students would have texts that they could explore so that they could draw their own conclusions on how the writers in their own disciplines were writing, so that I didn't have to learn the 400 disciplines in my field, in my university. And finally, I was going to train the students to use concordances and some other strategies so that they could analyze frequencies and collocations and some other types of linguistic analysis that could give them these skills that they could take with them once the class was over, so that they can continue doing that analysis with any genre that they want to explore. And then the second part is this empowerment through autonomy and authenticity. Well, the idea is, well, we all want to work with authentic texts. And if I had a corpus, the corpus is going to have authentic texts. I had to do something before that, and I'm going to share that with you in a second. But it's important to use these authentic materials so that your students can encounter the language that happens in the real world. Okay, it's very frustrating to find someone who tells you, I've never seen those expressions because they are never in the textbooks that I use, which is 100% true. I made a mini study of I have what I consider a small corpus, because I like large corpora, but I have a small corpus of academic writing and academic reading textbooks. And you know, that is very troublesome to collect because they are not electronic, so you have to type That's the only way that you can transfer that into machine-readable language. I was fortunate. I had a couple of students who wanted some extra credit, and so I asked them to type for me. We have in our department something that's called internship, so students get some extra credits and they can work with you. So I made mini projects for them, but they had to start by typing a textbook. Okay, so that was like their contribution, and then we did some analysis. It was a give and take. So they ended the semester with a report in which they learned how to collect a corpus, how to use a concordancer, how to answer a couple of research questions, and they got their research experience, and I got my textbook typed. Okay, and so then that is very empowering, okay, to know that the language that you are using is the language that people are using in a particular register. Okay, so there were lots of things that needed to be done, lots of decisions that needed to be done, even before thinking of designing the class. The first thing was, well, if this is going to be a genre-based and corpus-based course, which genres are we going to look at? Well, this particular course that I was teaching at Iowa State was mostly PhD students, was 80% PhD students, so the research article was the genre that I chose. But when I transferred my teaching position to Georgia State, the percentages changed, and so there are a lot of MA students in the classes. Sometimes you have 70% master students and just 30% PhD students. So master students are not required to write research papers early on. Sometimes they do when they are in the last semesters, but at the beginning they write some other type of shorter papers. So what I decided was, when I transferred to Georgia State, I decided that I was going to start with what Swales calls a minor genre, which is the book review. And for some students, the article review, because in some disciplines there's so much publication that you don't have book reviews anymore. People don't write books, they just write articles. So then you have article reviews. So I chose the book review and the article review, and I started using the same type of analysis that I did at Iowa State with the book review, with the research article, with the book reviews. And then I do an introduction to the research article, maybe just the introduction section or introduction method section in the rest of the semester. But I'm going to concentrate today on the course as it was designed from the very beginning. So I'm going to speak a lot about the research article as the genre that I selected for the design of the curriculum. So once I decided that the corpus, the genre was going to be the research article, I started with the corpus collection. To be absolutely honest with you, when I taught the class for the first time, I had just gotten a grant, and so I had a lot of research assistants, and for the pilot course that we did, my research assistants collected the corpus. So students didn't collect their own corpus. We gave them the corpus, which was, of course, great, because collecting a corpus is time consuming. So I did the study with a course that had a corpus that was ready-made. So that means I started with the analysis of the corpus on week 1 of the semester, which doesn't happen anymore. I don't have any more money now. Mm-hmm. So we collected that corpus, but nowadays we collect the corpus ourselves. So each student collects his or her own corpus, and I'm going to tell you how we do that. The course has a mix, and a nice mixture of top-down and bottom-up activities that I'm going to speak about in a little while. So for these bottom-up activities, we use some computer programs, particularly a concordancer, and I'm going to show some so that you have an idea what can be done. And then the design of the course was to choose the readings and the materials that the students were going to interact with, so that they could see the different organization and linguistic conventions in each of the sections of the research article before they started producing their own writing. Well, as I said, I selected research articles for the first pilot course, but there are lots of genres that can be chosen and could be the target of a course like this one. Argumentative essays, lab reports, book reviews, article reviews, research reports, models and simulations. There are lots of disciplines in the United States, like for example, urban and regional planning. I remember that one because when I was using the research article in that pilot course, I had a student from regional planning, and she came and asked and told me, we don't write research articles in my discipline, we write models. That means they have an introduction in which they pose a problem, but they don't go and collect data to answer that question. They model the problem, okay, and then they provide some solutions, some suggested solutions for that problem. That happens in different disciplines. So that is something that I had to bear in mind, that not everybody was going to be happy with the research article as I had conceived it on my mind. Okay, and of course a lot of people in the literature before me. Okay, so the first thing in collecting a corpus or designing a corpus is you have to be very careful with the text that you are going to select. So, as I said before, I was no expert in any of the disciplines that my students came from. So I needed a lot of information. I needed information about my students. I needed to know where they came from, what their first languages were, what was the type of reading that they were doing, which were the programs they were coming from, as much information as I could from them. But I also needed them to interact with their professors so that they could get information about the type of writing that was going to be the target for their exploration, okay, so the language that they were going to explore. That was very, very important. They had to work with an advisor that could be their academic advisor or someone else among the faculty in their departments, and they had to meet with this person and ask a series of questions about, okay, so if you could think of a model, some journals that could be a model for me to use to analyze, which journals would they be? And that was very funny because even though there are lots of top journals in the field, everybody has somewhere on their minds a couple of journals that are the model of writing in the field. And so that was good because I asked students to ask more than one faculty member about that. And so they chose as the target to collect their corpora those journals that had been mentioned by more than one professor. Okay, so when there was some commonality, those were the target journals. And then finally, something very important that we don't consider, we in our country, we don't consider that very much, and it was not very much considered in the States when I started collecting that corpus, was copyright issues. So I didn't know what I was dealing with because everybody thinks that because it's online, it's free. And I was scared because my students were going to be manipulating these articles, downloading them, and like doing whatever they wanted with them. And I didn't want to be in trouble because, I mean, professors many times get in trouble in the States because if you, I don't know, photocopy a textbook, it can only be 10% of the textbook because the Oxford University Press got to know that some professors at Georgia State were asking the library to download chapters from textbooks, and so they had a terrible lawsuit that they had to pay for. So I consulted a librarian and I asked my librarian if what I was doing was fine. Okay, so it's like if my students get online and download papers from the library, how safe are we? And it seems we were, so we went ahead. Okay, I've been working with this for the last 15 years and I haven't been sued yet, so I'm okay. Okay, so students collect their own corpora of texts, and they do this with clear instructions and modeling, and that happens the first week in the course. So I collect the corpus of applied linguistics for myself, and I do that with them. So I instruct them to go to the library website, how to download the papers, how to manipulate the papers so that they can, because it's the research article, how they select and they divide the article into different sections. Let's think that we are working with research articles. The students download their articles and they save them in their computers. If you are lucky and your university has a lab, they can download them to the computer lab. I always tell them to save them on a stick drive or in their laptops or at home in their computers. When I teach this class in the States now, I teach it hybrid. That means we meet only once a week, and the other class they do online. So that's great. In fact, this class now, I would feel really happy if they could take it completely online. Okay, and my university is it's an urban university. That means we don't have a campus. We have classrooms in different places in the city, like the UBA here. And so we have a lot of students and we don't have enough classrooms. So if you cannot use a classroom one day, everybody's really happy. So having a hybrid class in which you meet with the students only once, and if you have many students, you can meet only once, half of the class with half of the students and half of the class with the other halves. And then the other days, you can have the class online. So that is very much encouraged. So the articles that the students downloaded were divided into sections, in the sections of the IMRD research article structure. Sometimes there were issues, like with the case of the student from urban and regional planning, in which case we work with that individually. And then the analysis that the students made was goes from general to specific, and it's top down and bottom up. Top down is genre based. It works with the organization, so we look at moves and we look at rhetorical moves and communicative functions. And then bottom up is linguistic conventions. So we look at certain features that are very salient in the particular section of the research article that we are looking at, from the literature and from my own research. Okay. Okay. In order to do this bottom-up analysis, the students work with a concordancer. There are different types of concordancers. One is free, downloadable, for example, like Anconc, which was designed by my friend Lawrence Anthony. He works in Japan. So if you Google Anconc, it's going to take you to his page, and he has a suite of computer programs that you can download for free to do wide variety of linguistic analysis. Anconc is very complete. I think that for the type of course that I teach, it's too much for the students. But the main advantage is that it's free. And the students can download it everywhere. They can download it in the computer that we have in the lab at school, and then their computer at home, and if they have a laptop, in their laptop, so they can continue working in any computer. Okay, and there are some other programs like Monoconc or Wordsmith that are also too much for an academic writing class, because they have too many applications that you can do. So when I taught the class for the first time, I decided to design my own concordancer that's called Word Search, and it's very simple. You can look for words, single words or expressions of up to 4 words, and you can look at language. So what the concordancer does is it looks, you want to see, for example, how many times people use the word therefore in a corpus. So you just write therefore, you press the button and it brings up all the instances of therefore with a lot of code text before and after. So that is very useful, particularly because imagine that you are working with your students on a top-down approach and you are looking at the different moves of the introduction. And so the first move, I'm going to talk about that in a little while too. The first move is establishing the field, and you know that while establishing the field, there's a lot of present perfect and there's a lot of words that imply saliency, like important, interesting. So you want to see if your students can find those words in their corpus. So you provide that information and you instruct them on how to use the program, and they can look for those words themselves, okay? And so they can draw their own conclusions. Oh, look, this is undoubtedly this is move one, and people are using the word salient a lot of times, okay? Then this is Unconc. This is the one that you can download from the internet. It's exactly the same, but with this program you can also look for collocations, you can look for n-grams, you can look for keywords, you can do corpora comparison. So it has a lot of things that I don't think I wanted my students to learn. Okay, because I mean my students were still an astronomist, a plant physiologist, a computer scientist. They were not discourse analysts, okay? So they were becoming interested in analyzing language, but they were not applied linguists, and they were not going to be. Okay, so the whole course is based on these premises. First, on these corpus management and software tutorials. The first class is students need to learn how to collect their papers for the corpus, then they need to collect how to separate the paper into sections, then they need to learn how to use the software, whichever concordancer you use. You need 1 or 2 sessions for them to play with the corpus and see what the concordancer can do. And then the course is based on investigating writing in the disciplines. So first we work on text organization, and for these the students have a lot of reading activities, and what they read are in fact shortened versions of research articles in applied linguistics that look at the commonalities in writing introductions or in the commonalities of writing methodologies. And so instead of making students read the whole research article by Swales, 1981, for example, we summarize that into a 2-page report that the students read, followed by a lot of activities that help them go to the corpus and see if whatever Swales said is happening in their corpus. Because I mean, we applied linguists usually work with corpora that is not 100% discipline specific. There are some discipline specific studies, but we are never going to cover all the disciplines. So I gave students something that was a bit more generic, so that then they could do their own investigation in their own corpus that they had collected from their fields. So they did those reading activities, they went to the corpus and explored the corpus, and then they wrote their response. So, oh well, this is the move analysis in the introduction in that Suez spoke about, but in my discipline XXX, this move was like this move was like this one was not non-existent, okay, there was an extra step over here that was like, so they, after you do the introduction and they write that report, they bought the whole product, because that is exactly what they are going to do with the other sections. And once they do that, they know that what they are reading is something that something had always been there, and they had never been told that it was there. Because if your students are PhD students, as those were, they had been reading research articles for a long time, but nobody told them what to look at when they were reading those research articles. And that is what happened to me. I had been reading those research articles for years, but I really didn't know what I was supposed to look at. So the moment that I discovered these communicative functions and someone told me what I'm supposed to look at, now I know what the organization should tell me. Okay, so that we start from broad and we go to specific. We start from establishing the field, passing by the description of previous research. Then we do some sort of showing the gap, and we introduce the purpose of the study. That's the way that an introduction is written. And when you are a very well-known, famous researcher, writing for a top journal, you can do whatever you want. But if this is your first paper, this is going to help you a lot, okay? I always say that because when I present this in the United States, I always have people telling me, when are students going to find their voice? And I'm like, I'm sure they will. But if someone had told me this when I was writing my first paper, I would have felt much I would have felt much better, and I would have known that I was using this as some sort of a scaffolding, okay? That once you feel comfortable with what you are supposed to say, maybe you don't need to use that strict organization anymore. As a reviewer and editor now, I am the book review editor of the English for Specific Purposes journal, and I review dozens of articles. I expect an organization in the writing. And sometimes the writer that submits a manuscript, and you know it's blind, so I don't know who the writer is a very good writer, an excellent writer. The language is beautiful. And at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I wish the moves were a bit clearer, because I'm really happy when I can see, oh, okay, so this is the field that you're going to speak about, and now you're going to tell me this didn't happen, and this is the purpose of your paper. It saves me a lot of time that I can devote to analyze other sections of the paper, like, for example, the methodology, okay, and the data collection and the results. It allows me to devote more time to that than to the organization of the paper. But some people feel free to write the way they want, and I'm like, it would have been so nice. Okay, it's so well written that it's not really well organized. And finally, there were, for each of the sections of the research paper, there were some language focus, particularly highlighting linguistic features that are very frequent in a particular section. So you know that the introduction has 3 or 4 moves, and each move has some linguistic features that are characteristics of those, of each move, and also some features that are characteristic of some steps. So telling students, okay, you know, you are looking at this move, this is the move of presentation, presenting the research that you're doing. And so then you have expressions like, the purpose of this study is to determine, that repeats hundreds of times, okay? So don't be too creative with that. There's no need. Be creative with the rest, okay, when you are telling me what your study is about. So those expressions save time, because you are indicating to your reader what's coming. You know that you are safe with that expression, and then you can devote much more time to the creative aspect of your paper, which has to do with the study that you completed. Okay, I want to speak a bit about, I don't know how I'm doing with time, but I think I'm fine. I want to speak a bit about a research study that I did, because, well, you're going to laugh about this, but it happens everywhere. When you are assigned classes, you are assigned classrooms. And I was teaching a couple of classes one semester. 2 classes were the academic writing class for international graduate students. So I was like, oh, I'm so happy. I have only 1 prep for those 2 classes, because it's the same class that repeats. Unfortunately, I was the same teacher, and I thought I was going to do the same curriculum, but one of the classes was in a lab and the other one was not. Okay, so there was a schedule conflict, no corpus. The one in the lab could be with the corpus. The one that was not in the lab, I couldn't do it with the corpus. So I was like, okay, no two preps then. Not one prep, two preps. So I said, I'm going to teach the one in the lab, corpus-based, genre-based, as I had been doing. What am I going to do with the one that doesn't have a lab and no computers? What do I do? Do I go back to the first time that I taught the class and go back to that textbook that the student said, yeah, it's okay, but it doesn't represent the writing in my field? And I said, no, I'm going to try out a new class because I'm like that. Okay, so yeah, I just look for more work instead of just taking advantage of what it's done. So the corpus-based class was what I told you before. But the non-corpus-based, genre-based class was taught in a regular classroom, so there was no computer lab, just classroom seats, and it was even worse. I had 20 students too, and instead of analyzing a corpus, I decided the students were going to analyze 4 research articles selected by themselves and their advisors. So it was exactly the same as the other class in which the students collected the corpus. Usually the corpus was 30 articles for the ones in the corpus class. So here they had to bring 4 paper copies, hard copies, of articles that they chose together with their advisors with the same criteria: good journals to imitate the writing, okay, maybe topics that they were interested in. Okay, so the materials were the same. I used PowerPoints in my class for the corpus, but the classroom that I was giving, the regular classroom, didn't even have a computer beam, okay, and it didn't have a computer. It had the old and never well seen transparency overhead projector. They still exist. So I made all my PowerPoints into transparencies. It was a bit difficult to find the transparencies, but I did. And so that's how the materials that I presented were designed. And then the student worksheets that the students had for the corpus class were the same. Okay, instead of corpus, I would just put your 4 texts. Okay, but the readings were the same because I was explaining the same, and students were looking at only 4 papers in paper. They did the same readings from the studies. They analyzed the 4 hard copies, and then this was the worst part for the students. They had to handwrite the reports. So usually at the end of the class, once they had analyzed the corpus, or they had explored the corpus, the students would write a short report of what they found that day. So when they were looking at the 4 papers, my idea was they had to do the same. You don't know how much students complained because nobody was writing anymore. Nobody hand writes anymore. So it's like, my hand hurts. I don't handwrite. And I'm like, oh, please. Okay? Yes, nobody writes anymore. But I mean, there was nothing I could do. They were not bringing laptops. So you write in pencil and paper. I don't care. It was not too much. It was like 3-4 sentences and very short reports. Everybody was complaining. Anyway, of course, when they had to write the full report, final reports for each section, they did that at home. So they did that on their computers. Okay, so I did this research study in which I wanted to see the differences between these 2 courses. I tried to limit variables as much as possible because I was the same teacher, the materials were the same, students were different, but I said, okay, let's see what happens with their writing. If there are more gains because the computers are there or because the computers are not there. So the first thing that we did was I did a holistic analysis of the research papers submitted at the end of the semester for the 2 courses. So I evaluated them the same way that I evaluate all the other papers. I had a rubric and I go through the writing. The final paper is a research article that the students are writing for another class. And if they are not writing a research article for another class, there is a, let's say, template research article that they can write with. I would call it like this. It's a research article about how to write a research article. Okay, so with all the information that they collected from the corpus exploration, they write a research article. Okay. Then what we did is I had a group of 5 raters, all writing teachers, some of them very well known, very well published in international journals, that volunteered to help me evaluate the introduction section of some papers from each of the courses. Okay, I used the introduction section because I wanted that section because it's the more homogeneous. Okay, so there were not going to be too many differences across disciplines. So I said, okay, we'll do just the introductions. We did 10 from one course and 10 from the other course. So we had a rating session in which we all rated 1 or 2 introductions. We went through the rubric, and then once we had more or less an inter-rater a percentage that was more or less feasible, everybody took all the copies home, did the assessment, and I did the inter-rater reliability later on. And then I gave students questionnaires at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the semester. And as a follow-up, I interviewed some students from each of the courses. So let me show you some answers. The first questionnaire shows you that the corpus-based class had more PhD students and the non-corpus-based class had more MA students, but that it was out of chance, okay, because students don't know which class is the corpus class or not the non-corpus class. They just register because of the schedule usually, and so it was like that. One of the questions in the questionnaire was how much experience do you have writing research articles in your first language? And as you can see, the PhD students had more experience because many of them may have written maybe a thesis in their first language and then or something else, some article in their first language, and the MAs not so much. Now, as you can see, neither of the 2 groups had a lot of experience writing research articles in English before the class. Okay, the PhD students could identify the sections easily because they had been reading much more and not so much the MAs. And then they listed different things that they consider important about research articles, like discussing findings, the organization of the paper, and for the MAs, data presentation, grammar and language issues. As you can see, for the MAs, language is still an issue, while the PhDs look more onto the organization of the paper. Nobody knew what a corpus was. For the corpus class, nobody knew what a concordancer was, so everybody was novel into that before the class started. Okay, in the midterm, around midterm of the semester, I gave them another questionnaire, and as you can see, everybody thought that they were learning new things and that the knowledge was helping them with reading mainly, and that some of the things that they were learning could be transferred into the writing. Both courses thought that they had learned a lot about the organization and the linguistic conventions, and also a specific language for the research article. That was, in fact, one of the objectives of the course. And then for the people in the corpus-based class, they wanted more varied corpora, and for the people in the non-corpus class, they were interested in doing more class discussions, because we were doing a lot of reading and writing, but they were not discussing a lot. This is great because as they gave me these in the week 8 in the semester, I had time to do more, tell them to collect more corpora, or give more discussions to the other group. Then it was funny because the people in the non-corpus class wanted better slides for the overhead projector. Yeah. Okay, and then people that were working with the corpus thought that the corpus was very helpful. Then the concordancer was 93% of the time was perceived as helpful also, so they were happy with that. This was I was using my concordancer in those days. Okay, so this is the evaluation with the writing samples. So the people assessed 20 introductions, 10 from each section, 10 introductions, 5 from each section. And then the rating session, as I said, we all decided how we were going to rate the papers. Then we have a rubric that I'm going to show you. This rubric is adapted from a study that was done on writing in chemistry, from a book that's called Write Like a Chemist by Frederica Starler and Marianne Robinson. And they had a rubric of 5 points, but because we were only working with the introduction, I shortened it to 4 points. So I took inter-rater reliability, and it was really high. It was 0.92. But as you can see, there was no significant difference in the papers. This was over 4 points, and the average was 2.48 for the corpus class and 2.4 for the non-corpus class, which is there was no difference. The writing was not bad, okay, it was 2.4 over 4, but it was not, but it was more or less the same in both courses. It's funny because the first time that I presented these findings at a conference, John Flowerdew, who is also a discourse analyst, he told me, I'm not surprised there was no difference. And I'm like, well, I'm a corpus-based researcher. I wanted the corpus class to do better. And he told me, no, you didn't, because you were the teacher of both courses and you wanted all your students to succeed. So I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't do more with the non-corpus class than with the others. He made me feel really guilty, or on the contrary, happy, because I was doing my job. But it could have been, okay, that because I want all my students to succeed, I was imparting the same instruction to everybody, and the idea that they had the corpus people, the corpus-based group, had more language to analyze, may have been negative in a way. And this happened also. It was very funny. This is the last questionnaire, and as you can see, half of the class thought that the corpus was too big, and half of the class thought that the corpus should be bigger. So that shows, as I always say, you cannot make everybody happy. Okay, never. Okay, I usually, in my grammar class, we do a lot of discussions, and by midterm, my evaluation comes back. I usually give them this constructive feedback, and I have 50% say, oh, I love discussion, it's so good, so lively, entertaining, and half of the class says, I'm sick and tired of discussion, I want you to lecture. And so then I usually show the results to the students, and I say, this means I cannot make everybody happy, live with it. Because the day that I do discussion, some people are going to be unhappy. The day that I don't do discussions, some people are going to be unhappy. Both groups of students would recommend the class. They were very satisfied in general with the class. They didn't have a lot of suggestions. For the people that were in the non-corpus class, they were asked if they were using more papers to analyze the writing, but not too many said that they were working with papers outside the 4 papers that they had in class. But it was very funny because when I did the interviews, I asked the people in the non-corpus class if they could see the same class taught in a computer lab with a lot of texts. And I asked the people in the corpus class the opposite. So what would you think of having this class in a regular classroom without corpus and computers? And nobody could see the other class. It was like, no corpus, no computer? Oh, that's impossible. Or the people that I said, well, wouldn't you like to take this class in a computer lab with a corpus? Oh, yeah, just for typing, because I mean, the handwriting was awful. But for the rest, no, what for? So they couldn't see the other classes. I said, well, I can't tell them that the class exists. Only one student in the non-corpus class, when I asked that question to him on the interview, he said, of course, you could teach the class in a computer lab, and instead of 4 hard copies, you could have 100 electronic copies, and then you could use some computer programs. And I'm like, oh, you are the instructional technology student. He was a PhD student in instructional technology, so he could see the class immediately when I asked him that. Okay, so this is, for you to have an idea, this is the first class on research article introductions that I usually teach when I introduce. The first class, we look at the whole research article, we look at the sections. But then when we start with the introductions, this is the material for the first class. Then second class would be on each of the moves individually so that I can show the steps. But as an opening class, I showed these. So this was the name of the class when I taught it at Iowa State. It was called English 101 Corpus Based, that's why CB. And then I introduced all of them to John Swales, and I showed them a picture of John's, and I always tell him that he is a professor emeritus in the University of Michigan, and that he wrote this genre analysis book in 1981, in which, even though his study was a bit earlier, the book is 1990, but the introduction study is from 1981. And so I show first what each of the moves is about. So Swale says that there is an opening section that prepared the ground in restricted number of ways for the summary of previous research about to come. So then there is something that opens the paper, okay, and it's in a way paving the way for whatever you are going to say later. And I have a really nice example that is taken from a journal in marketing. It's a paper that's called Attitudinal Congruence and Similarity as Related to Interpersonal Evaluations in Manager-Subordinate Diets. And this is move 1, okay? In recent years, applied researchers have become increasingly interested in the interpersonal relationships with there's a mistake there, manager-subordinate diets. So, as you can see, that sentence has absolutely every single thing that an opening sentence should have. It's in the present perfect, okay? Increasingly interested, as I said, there is always something that shows saliency, and it's very general. It's very general because it's telling you something of a very general field. So it starts very general and goes to more specific. In the second move, we have the description of previous research. And as you can see, this is from the same paper. You have all the previous research there. You have studies have focused on actual similarity between managers and subordinates, and there you have a lot of references. Subordinates' job satisfaction, reference. Subordinates' evaluation of their managers, references. A few studies have examined the extent to which this happens, references. So there you have a very beautiful description of previous research from the same paper. In move 3, you have a few cases in which you are going to identify something that is missing from the previous literature, and that is what we call indicating the gap. And so here you have the gap in this same paper. Each of these previous studies, which were from the previous move, the description of previous research, has researched only a part of this complex interpersonal relationship. Now, I'm telling you, this is exactly the gap. None of the studies has done this, no studies can be found that compare this, and none of the previous studies has looked at this. And so, I am going to tell you what the present research is. And this is from the paper, and it starts the way that it should start. The purpose of the present field investigation was to study, and then it continues with a lot of steps, explaining the study, explaining the methodology, and I think that even saying some of the findings. So this is an example that I took from my corpus that I dissected, okay, into the different moves, so that my students can see a nice example that they can use as a model when they are identifying the moves in their own papers. Okay, so this is part of the course that I taught. I'm going to say something. This course with that curriculum was taught at Iowa State and is still taught by some professors. It's only taught at Georgia State when I teach the class, and as we are speaking, it's being reshaped to be taught at Emory University, which is the private university in Atlanta. There are other universities in other parts of the world that are using sections of this curriculum, because I was happy to share it with anybody. However, in the States, when you are the professor, you decide how you teach the class. And there are some people that really don't feel comfortable using computers, corpora, or doing genre analysis in the classroom. So they still think that the students need to learn grammar to write. And that's the way that they teach the class. So there's nothing I can do about it. I teach the class the way I want. And my students, when they are asked to teach the class, always ask me. I have PhD students who have assistantships and they need to teach a class. When they are assigned to teach the class, they always come and ask me, because they have read my work, they ask me for my curriculum, and so they teach it like that. But the rest of the teachers, we have a lot of lecturers that teach the class, they don't feel comfortable and they do whatever they want with the class, because that's the way it is. Okay. So, the class activities that we usually do are still the readings, the corpus exploration, and finally the report that is done through writing. And that is more or less everything I have for today, I think. And I'm open to questions, and I'm happy to answer in English and in Spanish, because I think I can do that with this. I can happily answer questions in Spanish, I guess.
Viviana, mi nombre es Lucía, te quiero hacer una pregunta.
¿Cómo no?
Con respecto a las actividades de escritura que les propones a tus estudiantes, digamos. Bueno, nombraste algunas, te quería preguntar si ellos tienen en algún momento la oportunidad de vincular tus clases con alguna necesidad de escritura puntual que ellos tengan, no sé si para resolver un seminario o para alguna otra meta, digamos, ¿no?
Sí, en realidad el objetivo es que el paper final que escriben para esta clase es un research paper o un research report que ellos estén escribiendo para otra materia en sus disciplinas. Por ejemplo, un alumno de, no sé, plant pathology, me acuerdo bien de uno que estaba tomando una clase en plant pathology, era un alumno brasilero, y él me dijo, mira, yo estoy escribiendo este paper, me gustaría también después ver si lo puedo arreglar un poquito para publicación. Me dice, este va a ser el paper que yo voy a usar para esta clase. Así que durante todo el semestre él usó primero su corpus para analizar cómo escribían en plant pathology, ver cómo eran los MOOCs, ver cómo iban los linguistic conventions. Y después, al final de cada sección, ellos pueden escribir, primero escriben un reporte en el que sacan sus propias conclusiones de cómo se escribe generalmente una introducción o una metodología en la disciplina. Y después pueden escribir un draft, un borrador de esa sección. Entonces él hizo eso todo el semestre. Cuando él llegó al final del semestre, tenía su research paper listo para presentar en su otra clase.
Y gracias. Y en caso de que la disciplina lo requiera, digamos, o que el artículo de investigación no sea puro, pero bueno, hay otras formas, tienen la opción de elegir otros géneros también.
Sí, eso tuve que hacerlo, porque yo, o sea, no podía. Yo elegí el research article porque era el de la mayoría, pero es lo que pasó, ¿viste? Había mucha gente que no es lo que ellos llaman research report no tiene nada que ver con el research article, y quizás las únicas secciones que eran muy parecidas eran la introducción y la conclusión. Porque eso es la introducción, a pesar de que los papers puedan ser muy distintos, la introducción es más o menos parecida en cuanto a la organización. Siempre vas de general a específico y vas diciendo algo muy, muy abierto del campo y lo vas limitando, y al final vas a poner cuál es el propósito de este paper, aunque no sea un research article, aunque sea una revisión de literatura, también lo vas a poder poner así. Vas a decir, en este paper vamos a evaluar otras cosas, o sea, aunque no sea un research article. Y lo mismo en la conclusión, pero todo lo demás era sumamente distinto. Así que, bueno, los ayudé a tratar de analizar, a recolectar un corpus de esas secciones de los papers que ellos estaban analizando. Mira, Sin ir más lejos, una de las últimas veces que enseñé la clase en Georgia State tenía unos alumnos de música. Y ellos en realidad, yo al principio no me explicaba por qué tenían que tomar la clase de escritura, porque uno era de conducción, de orquesta, otro era de piano, pero ¿qué pasa? Tienen ellos en la carrera 2 o 3 materias en las que tienen que hacer análisis de texto y tienen que escribir, por ejemplo, una revisión de una obra de música. Entonces, bueno, trabajamos con esos textos. Ellos hicieron un corpus de eso, analizaron esos textos, sacaron conclusiones, escribieron un report y al final escribieron un paper de eso. Es un montón de trabajo para el profesor, pero ¿qué no es? ¿Viste? Lo que es muy satisfactorio es ver... Exactamente, viste que ellos sienten ese empowering, porque yo, por ejemplo, tenía un alumno argentino, mira, en Iowa State, un chico de Córdoba, y él estaba haciendo agronomía en Iowa State, y cuando terminó el curso me dijo, ¿yo me puedo llevar el Concordancer? Y le dije, sí, es mío, yo puedo hacer con él lo que quiera, así que llévate una copia, ponerlo en stick drive, llévatelo. Me dice, porque a mí me interesa muchísimo ver cómo se utilizan algunas expresiones en otros géneros que nos estábamos haciendo en clase. Pero eso me indicó a mí que él había en realidad aprendido lo que yo le quería enseñar, porque todavía tengo mis dudas de que yo les esté enseñando a escribir mejor. No sé, no lo puedo saber en realidad. Quizás tendría que hacer un estudio en el que pudiese seguir al alumno un par de semestres después que terminó el curso y ver si su escritura es más académica o no, y si quizás algo que aprendió en el curso le ayudó a poder publicar algo o a escribir su tesis de doctorado o su tesis de maestría. Pero lo que sí sé es que el propósito del curso es esto de abrirle los ojos al alumno de cómo se escribe, cosa de que él pueda tomar sus propias decisiones y hacer sus propias conclusiones y ver cómo escribir. Si él puede analizar distintos géneros y puede sacar conclusiones y tratar de imitar esas cosas que él descubrió en el análisis, me parece que esa es una gran ayuda. ¿Viste? Es como también como un objetivo más... Exacto, es como un objetivo un poco más alcanzable, ¿verdad? Es al menos un poco más medible. Si el alumno te dice al final del semestre, yo me quiero llevar este programa, voy a usarlo para analizar esto, bueno, eso era lo que yo quería que vos hicieras, ¿viste? Tratar de ver si podías analizar eso.
Viviana, perdón.
Sí.
Cecilia Gago, trabajo acá en la universidad en el proyecto de Dra Viviana. ¿El curso dura un semestre?
Sí, el curso dura solo 14 semanas.
14. Más o menos lo de un nivel nuestro, más o menos lo de un nivel
sí, 14 semanas.
¿Cuántos son por semana?
Y son 3 horas, 2 horas y media. Es decir, si son 2 veces por semana, es 1 hora y cuarto, 1 hora y 20, y después, si es un solo meeting, 2 horas y media.
Una pregunta.
Inés,
¿cómo te va?
¿cómo estás?
Una pregunta y un comentario. Una pregunta que te hago y que nos hacemos. ¿Los géneros para el estudiante o para el profesional? Porque no siempre es lo mismo. Cuando nosotros tuvimos que trabajar acá, cuando se reformaron los planes de las 2 lenguas que damos acá en la universidad, hicimos esta encuesta entre las distintas carreras, los distintos docentes, investigadores, y no todos contestaban lo mismo. Si vos querés que tus alumnos tengan el inglés para leer textos como estudiantes de ingeniería, historia, política, etcétera, o vos querés que tengan las herramientas para cuando sean ingenieros, profesores de historia, químicos, etcétera.
Hay una diferencia grande. Se están haciendo estudios sobre eso, sobre todo en ingeniería. Susan Conrad, que es una compañera mía con la que hemos escrito juntas, ella siempre hablaba del análisis del texto académico con una salida académica, pero se casó con un ingeniero y eso la hizo ver el mundo desde otra perspectiva. Entonces, desde ese momento decidió empezar a mirar las diferencias que había entre los géneros en la academia y los géneros en el lugar de trabajo. Y encontró muchísimas diferencias. Así que eso es otra decisión que tenés que hacer. ¿A qué le vas a prestar atención? Yo me incliné por lo académico, por mi propia experiencia, frustración, y también porque me parece más inmediato al alumno. O sea, el alumno que está haciendo un doctorado, aunque lo esté haciendo en ingeniería, necesita publicar. Primero tiene que terminar la disertación, por lo cual tiene que empezar a analizar ese tipo de textos. Va a necesitar leer muchos, si él puede organizar la lectura en cuanto a esos géneros y puede aprender la organización de esos géneros, le va a ser mucho más fácil cuando está leyendo toneladas de cosas para hacer su disertación. Por eso. Pero después me encantaría que esos alumnos pudieran tomar una clase que también fuera de género, pero con géneros que se ven en el lugar de trabajo al final de la carrera. Estas clases habitualmente los alumnos se la quieren sacar de encima, entonces la toman en el primer semestre, segundo semestre a lo máximo. ¿Viste? Entonces, tratamos de darle las herramientas que podamos con este curso. 14 semanas también es misión imposible. Pero bueno, al menos we raise awareness de lo que está pasando, de las cosas, de cómo son distintas las cosas y ver qué es lo que pueden hacer más adelante. Así que es lo que se puede.
El comentario que quería hacer es que la gama, ¿no? Entre los dos extremos, que es... Yo te estoy hablando de lectocomprensión, ¿no? Nosotros trabajamos acá. Pero creo que hay elementos que se pueden, son equivalentes en algún sentido, comparables con que entre dar un curso estructurado sobre progresiones gramaticales como si fuera, bueno, dando, qué sé yo, textos de publicidad o chistes o short stories, a sueños para todo el mundo, ¿no? Y el MDR siempre. Sí. Y es interesante porque, de todas maneras, la gente que sí, por lo que veo en los congresos, con las otras universidades que estamos en contacto, con Córdoba, con Comahue, que sí se han interesado sobre el tema de la mirada del género, eso les permitió ver cómo justamente había otros géneros, además del artículo de investigación.
Por supuesto.
Y dio lugar a estudios muy interesantes, porque gente está trabajando, por ejemplo, en diseño industrial, que olvídate de la estructura.
Nada que ver.
Tienen otro tipo de presentación de productos, bueno, otros géneros muy interesantes.
Absolutamente.
Como a descubrimiento, o dentro de farmacia y bioquímica, que existe un género que es farmacopea, que no tiene nada que ver con nada. Sí. Y creo que poder sumar algo de esto que vos presentaste, esta idea de trabajo con corpus, creo que es muy interesante.
Porque en realidad, como yo te digo, no sé si... o sea, yo elegí el Research Article porque era con lo que estaban trabajando ya con ese libro, Writing Up Research. Era un libro en el que se analizaba el Research Article. Entonces dije, bueno, hagamos esto. Pero en realidad... pienso que lo que le estoy enseñando es una metodología de análisis al alumno, ¿entendés? Porque una vez que el alumno se acostumbra, lo hice cuando me vine a Georgia State y tuve que empezar con el research article, con el book review, porque tenía tantos alumnos de maestría. Bueno, vamos a empezar con el book review porque eso todo el mundo tiene que hacer. Si no la tiene que escribir, la tiene que leer. Entonces vamos a empezar con esta. Entonces, cuando yo enseñé cómo analizar moves en un book review, y eso me llevó a ponerle 3 semanas, 4 semanas, porque son cortitas. Y después empecé con la introducción de un research article, o la introducción en general. Era facilísimo para el alumno ver cómo eran los moves, a pesar de que eran muy distintos a los del book review. Pero ya ellos tenían esa mentalidad de ver, esto va a tener una organización. Este texto, este párrafo, estas oraciones tienen un porqué, porque el autor en realidad tiene una propuesta comunicativa, me está tratando de decir algo. Inmediatamente se daban cuenta que era lo que estaba tratando de decir el autor. Yo, bueno, ya está, ya creo que puedo terminar el curso acá y me recibo, me voy de vacaciones, porque lo que yo quería era eso, yo quería abrirles los ojos para que ellos pudieran ver cómo estaba organizado el texto. Y bueno, ellos podían verlo, no sabían cómo se llamaba, qué sé yo, pero más o menos en su lenguaje me decían lo que estaba haciendo el texto. Bueno, acá en realidad lo que está haciendo, está evaluando esto. Sí, era eso. Bueno, se llama así en realidad en la jerga, le decimos así, pero es exactamente lo que está haciendo. Está evaluando la metodología, está presentando el tema del artículo, y así fue. O sea que ellos, en realidad esa era la historia atrás de diseñar un curso como este. Por eso te digo, como tenés solo 14 semanas, elegí bien qué género querés hacer, capaz que más de uno, y es tratar de involucrarle al alumno esta metodología de análisis que después puedes seguir haciendo cuando ya no está más en el curso, ¿entendés? Con otro tipo de género. Perdón.
Justamente, esa iba a ser mi pregunta. ¿Cómo guías al alumno para analizar el texto, para que se dé cuenta que tiene una estructura, que tiene movement?
Y empezás mostrándole los moves, porque si no, en caso del research article es fácil porque están ahí, pero si no los tenés, por ejemplo, yo hice un trabajo con un alumno que él quería analizar, eso viene bien para workplace genres, él quería analizar collection letters, porque él es contador, estaba estudiando accountancy, y uno de los textos muy importantes de su área era la de collection letter. Entonces él recolectó un corpus de collection letters, algunas del lugar donde él trabajaba, otras templates que hay online, otras de textbooks, y con eso empezamos a trabajar de collection letter con un move analysis de perspective. Yo nunca había visto una collection letter en mi vida, porque no sabía de qué se trataba, sabía que te llegaban porque lo vi en películas, pero nunca había visto una. Cuando él me trajo una, empezamos a hacer el move analysis como se hace desde el principio. A ver, cómo organizaríamos eso, qué te parece que está haciendo este párrafo, qué te parece que está haciendo aquí, cuál te parece que es la función de esto, la función de esto. Empezamos con una, él tenía creo que 32 collection letters, terminamos publicándolo, lo publicamos ese paper con él. Y él estaba muy interesado en linguistic analysis y lo hicimos. Encontramos un move, encontramos linguistic features para cada uno de los moves, le pusimos steps. Identificamos los moves nosotros, yo lo ayudé con cómo nombrarlos, porque ¿viste? Él no tenía la jerga, y bueno, fue así. Con un concordancer hicimos un keyword para saber cuáles eran las palabras que más se usaban, sobre todo las palabras léxicas, ¿no? Que más se usaban, sustantivos, verbos. Hicimos collocations, buscamos también marcadores de stance, ¿no? Atitudinales, porque como es una collection letter, otra cosa que aprendí, que él me enseñó, es que hay distintos estados de collection letters. Entonces, que primero te mandan una collection letter diciéndote que debes algo, que seguramente se le pasó el vencimiento. Segunda carta era, ya esta es la segunda carta que le mandamos, y realmente si no recibió la anterior o pagó, olvídese de esta carta, y si no, por favor, comuníquese con nosotros. Y la última ya un poco más fuerte, que la van a mandar a una collection agency. Exactamente. Exacto. Entonces era importante ver, cuando veíamos los ejemplos, en cuál de esos tres estados íbamos a poner las cartas, porque algunas no decían, pero por el lenguaje que tenían, las pusimos en distintos stages. Fue una estudio así. Así que eso se puede hacer con cualquier genre, sin ninguna duda.
Siempre es mejor con authentic material.
Y siempre es mejor. Nosotros lo que pasa es que usamos algunos que estaban online y templates porque eso puede traer muchos problemas, pedirle a una empresa que te dé la collection letter. Él, como trabajaba en una empresa, pudo conseguir algunos ejemplos reales, pero los demás los usamos de los templates. Igual era muy exploratorio el estudio, no sabíamos si íbamos a, capaz que no encontrábamos, no sé, un move, que era toda la carta, no solamente tiene que pagar, señor, por favor. Lo que sí hubo cosas muy interesantes, como por ejemplo el lenguaje que se usaba, a pesar de que cambiaba y era un poco más fuerte en los últimos stages, siempre se valoraba la relación con el cliente más que el pago. Mucho más que el pago. O sea, siempre se le pedía al cliente que se comunicara con la empresa ante cualquier problema que pudiera tener. Eso se reiteraba en los primeros stages. Ya en el último ya perdió la paciencia, pero no había muchas de las cartas del último stage.
¿Y el proceso cuál es? Primero analizar.
Empezás con empezás con uno y haces una taxonomía de moves. ¿Entendés? O sea, empezás con uno y te fijas bien qué es lo que el escritor está tratando de comunicar, cuál es la propuesta comunicativa. Está en este párrafo o en esta oración, creo que está haciendo esto. Entonces haces un pequeño outline de qué te parece que es. Buscas la segunda y haces lo mismo. Después los comparás y te fijas si hay algún overlap. Si hay un overlap, ya sabes que, mira, este se juntó acá, este se juntó acá. Volvés con esa taxonomía hasta que haces un par. Después ya vas a ver que hay cosas que se repiten y cosas que no. Cuando ves que hay un move que es nuevo, lo agregás. ¿Está? Esos son los estudios que más me gustan hacer en realidad, cuando es algo nuevo. Tengo un alumno que está interesado. Ahora en este momento tengo un alumno, voy a dar una clase de análisis del discurso ahora en la primavera allí arriba. Y tengo un alumno que él viene de la maestría en español, es americano y habla español y enseña español en la universidad. Y él quiere hacer un estudio de unas evaluaciones literarias, que es un género que se usa mucho cuando se enseña español, porque yo no sé si ustedes saben que en Estados Unidos y en muchos otros países, la gente que enseña idiomas que no son inglés, como español, portugués, habitualmente idiomas que vienen del latín, no son lingüistas, sino que son gente de literatura. Entonces, la mayoría de los textos que se usan son los textos literarios, usan libros, novelas, obras de teatro, y la literature, work review, o sea, se hace la revisión de un trabajo de literatura, y eso es un género que usan un montón. Para hacer análisis lingüístico en realidad, porque los alumnos están aprendiendo el idioma, no están aprendiendo literatura, no es una clase de literatura, es una clase de lengua 2, español 2, español 201, español 202. Pero ese es un texto que es muy usado. Y como él es lingüista, él dice, yo quiero hacer un análisis lingüístico de eso para ver si va con el resto de los textos que los alumnos están viendo, con el texto del curso, con, no sé, Hablemos Español 201, a ver si tienen cosas en común. Así que bueno, eso va a venir bien, porque ahora vamos a tener que hacer el análisis lingüístico y vamos a hacer el análisis retórico también para ver los modos. Después te lo cuento cuando llegue.
¿Cuáles son las dificultades? Si vos podés, seguro que lo podemos ver más adelante, pero vos como hispanohablante con la retórica inglesa, así con la retórica de inglés, ¿vos considerás que puede haber alguna dificultad mayor según la lengua?
Yo creo que no, la verdad que no, nunca se me presentó una dificultad muy grande.
Nosotros cuando a veces ayudamos a editar papers, ¿te das cuenta?
Bueno, eso te voy a contar, eso se llama being a broker. Claro. Yo estuve en una conferencia hace poquito en Portugal. La conferencia, había dos conferencias. Una se llamaba MET y la otra se llamaba Pre-Seal. La conferencia MET era encuentro de editores y traductores del Mediterráneo. Como yo soy editora de un journal, dije, bueno, como era en el mismo lugar, pero los 2 días antes de la conferencia a la que yo había sido invitada, que es una conferencia muy interesante porque es problemas de escritura en hablantes no nativos, o sea, que tienen inglés como lo que se llama una lengua, no es segunda lengua ni foreign language, ellos le dicen adicional, una lengua adicional, cuando están escribiendo para publicar, para publicaciones. Entonces dije, bueno, ya que es en el mismo lugar, voy a ir a la otra, porque ya que soy editora, voy a ir. Pero en realidad, estos editores no eran editores de journals, eran editores de papers. Eran lo que en la jerga se llama brokers. Es la persona que te paga, o no, porque depende del lugar, para que le edites el paper. Por ejemplo, había una persona que vi una presentación de alguien en China, en donde los language teachers, English teachers en las universidades son los brokers de todo el mundo. Todo el mundo quiere que les editen los papers, for free, que es lo que pasa acá. Y estos eran el grupo de editores del Mediterráneo. Y eso fueron cosas que para mí fueron muy sorprendentes, porque yo, cuando era joven y estudiaba acá, siempre veía que cuando una persona que era española estudiaba inglés, llegaba a ser fluido y tener una proficiency realmente alta, porque en 2 veranos se iba a trabajar a Inglaterra y conseguía un trabajo de au pair o no sé, algo, y el lenguaje le subía, pero absolutamente, era fantástico. Lo mismo en Francia, se iban a otro país a aprender otro idioma. Bueno, se ve que esto no está pasando últimamente, porque te digo que en toda Europa los científicos pagan para que les editen todo, como hacen en muchos otros países. Pero yo no me lo imaginaba en Europa, para que pagar un editor, porque me parecía que primero se aprenden muchas lenguas, segundo, estás ahí nomás, te vas a hacer un curso 2 o 3 veranos y ya llegarás. Cuando estás estudiando en una universidad, te puedes hacer un Erasmus, y podés ir a Inglaterra, por ejemplo, y hacer un posgrado o algo. Parece que no ocurre mucho porque estos editores tenían un montón de trabajo y cobraban sumas.
Dejando la parte monetaria,
sí.
Creo que me importaba esta noticia porque a veces es muy difícil mostrar al investigador.
Ellos decían exactamente eso. ¿Entendés? Que lo más difícil no era convencerlos.
Claro, ellos consideran como que inglés les obliga a entrar en el cuello del embudo, en el cuello de botella.
Sí.
Ellos tienen todas estas ideas y todo este vocabulario, su retórica es muy amplia.
Vocabulario sí, un montón.
En inglés consideran que dijeron la mitad de las cosas que querían decir, a pesar de que vos les mostrás que no. Entonces, pues, a mí me interesaría mucho ver esas retóricas, ¿no? Cómo ayudar a esta gente a solucionar el tema del embudo, o la sensación o la percepción de que se tienen que meter en una especie de embudo para poder decir cómo se dice, ahí donde dicen, ¿dónde está mi voz?
¿Dónde está mi voz? Sí. Eso, hay una persona, Karen Englander, que trabajó mucho tiempo con científicos en México. Ahora está en Canadá, pero ella es mexicana, americana, y ella trabajó muchos años en Baja California con científicos mexicanos, ayudándolos a publicar. Y tiene un libro nuevo que sacó hace muy poco, que son reportes de sus alumnos, a los que yo después te lo voy a pasar. Sí.
Bueno, ¿alguna otra pregunta más?
Sí, volviendo al tema de los MOOCs y las taxonomías. No hay clasificaciones de los MOOCs, digamos, para la mayoría de los géneros. Son muy pocos que están armados.
Sí, la verdad que sí, hay pocos. Son los que más se usan y bueno, cada vez hay más. Yo veo cosas muy nuevas, pero no, la verdad que a veces viene un alumno y me dice, hay algo publicado, moves de, no sé, algún género así como advertising, algo y yo sé tanto como vos, así que a sentarte en la computadora y a buscar y no encuentran nada, así que siempre pones to our knowledge. No encontramos nada que alguien que lo hizo. Habitualmente tenemos un grupo, qué sé yo, podés hablar con gente para ver, ¿sabés si alguien está haciendo esto y alguien puede haber leído algo más? Pero no, la verdad que no. Ojalá hubiese de muchas cosas y se pudieran hacer más. Ni siquiera podemos describir lingüísticamente, podemos describir lingüísticamente un porcentaje, imagínate con corpus, que es quizás parezca más fácil porque es lingüístico y es cuantitativo, y sin embargo tenemos un porcentaje mínimo de los géneros que han sido descriptos con un corpus, ¿viste? Porque todo lleva tiempo y dinero y todo es muy nuevo también, porque hace 20 años nadie sabía cómo hacerlo, entonces ahora que es como la segunda o tercera camada que se recibe y entonces hacen más, pero sí, ojalá haya muchos más, así que vayan, junten y analicen, que quiero leer. De nada, muchas gracias por invitarme.